Hello, today we're going to look at Swati Nakshatra. Swati occupies the middle degrees of Libra and is the 15th nakshatra in the Vedic Zodiac. Swati is a welcome change of tone from some of the heavier nakshatras we have covered recently. It is lighter, more adaptable, and more socially oriented. But it is not without its own complexity. And the central complexity of Swati is worth addressing at the outset because it might seem like a contradiction. Swati is associated with two seemingly opposite themes. One, that of flexibility, adaptability, and going with the flow, and two, that of fierce independence, self made ventures, and the refusal to be contained within someone else's structure. How can the same nakshatra produce both? The answer to that question is the key to understanding Swati, and it is what we will explore today. Swati has three core themes: strategic adaptability in the service of independence, independent ventures and commerce, and learning the arts and spiritual depth. All three flow from its symbol and its presiding deity. Swati symbol is a young plant shoot quivering in the wind. That image is precise and instructive. The shoot is delicate and vulnerable. It has not yet developed the strength of a mature plant, and yet it is alive, growing, and oriented towards the light. When the wind blows, it does not resist, it bends. It goes with the wind because going with the wind is what allows it to survive. And then, when the wind passes, it straightens again and continues growing. That capacity to bend without breaking, to adapt to whatever pressure the environment applies without losing the underlying drive toward growth and self determination, is Swati's most essential quality. The flexibility is not weakness, it is the strategy that makes independence possible. The presiding deity is Vayu, the wind god. Vayu reinforces Swati's proclivity for restlessness and roaming. He's always in motion, always finding new paths, and never contained in one place. From Vayu, Swati draws its association with movement, restlessness, and the tendency to sway back and forth or experience instability. Ayurvedically, Vayu represents the Vata or the wind element in the body, and Swati natives may be prone to Vata disturbances like gastric complaints related to gas and wind. Swati also has a special association with Saraswati, the goddess of learning, literature, and music. It is considered auspicious to begin worshipping Saraswati when the moon occupies Swati. That connection gives the nakshatra a strong orientation toward knowledge, artistic expression, and the kind of philosophical depth that develops slowly through sustained reflection rather than sudden insight. Three planets are worth noting specifically. Rahu, Venus, and Saturn become especially powerful in Swati. When Rahu occupies the ascendant in Swati, it can give great strength and endurance, which reinforces the nakshatra's capacity to persist through difficulty and adapt without breaking. The three themes worth understanding in Swati are as follows. The first is strategic adaptability in service of independence. This is the central paradox of Swati, and it is worth explaining carefully. Swati's independence is not the independence of Magha. It is not the authority of the king who sits at the center of an inherited structure. It is something quite different. It is the independence of the self made person who cannot thrive within someone else's structure and who therefore learns to read every environment with great sensitivity, adapt tactically to whatever conditions they encounter, and use that adaptability to carve out a space where they can eventually operate entirely on their own terms. The young shoot does not bend because it wants to bend. It bends because bending is what allows it to survive long enough to grow tall and stand on its own. The flexibility is the method, and independence is the goal. Swati natives are highly attuned to their environment, skilled at reading situations, and capable of adjusting their approach without losing sight of where they are ultimately headed. That combination of social and situational intelligence in service of autonomous purpose is what produces Swati's merchants, independent business builders, and self made professionals. The second theme is independent ventures and commerce. The classical texts are very specific. Swati governs merchants and those who are good at buying and selling, and those who establish independent businesses and professional practices. The key word is independent. Swati does not produce good employees or loyal institutional servants. It produces people who need to build something of their own. The third theme is learning, the arts, and spiritual depth. When the ascendant of moon occupies Swati, the native is often philosophical, thoughtful, spiritual, or religious. Someone who tends to need time to digest understanding rather than reacting immediately. The connection to Saraswati gives this nakshatra a strong orientation toward literature, music, and learning. Ascetics and students of profound subjects also fall under Swati, like people who pursue knowledge or spiritual practice with the same quiet persistence that the young shoot brings to its growth. The shadow side is worth noting briefly. Swati can produce restlessness and instability. The wind that gives the nakshatra its flexibility can also make it difficult to settle and commit. There may be a tendency to sway back and forth on decisions, or to roam without fully arriving anywhere. When the ascendant falls in Swati, the themes of strategic adaptability, independent enterprise, and philosophical depth tend to show up clearly across the arc of the person's life. Shah Rukh Khan has Swati rising, and his story is one of the most complete expressions of this nakshatra's self made independence in modern Indian culture. He came to Bollywood from Delhi in the early 1990s, an outsider with no film family connections, no established network, and no inherited platform. Everything he built from scratch. What made that possible was a quality of extraordinary adaptability. He read the industry with great sensitivity, understood what each moment required, and adjusted his approach accordingly without ever losing sight of where he was headed. He moved from intense dramatic roles to romantic leads to comic performances to action films to meta cinematic appearances, always bending to what the audience and the moment called for, always growing. He eventually built Red Chillies Entertainment and became one of the most powerful independent forces in Indian cinema. The shoot bent in every wind Bollywood threw at it and grew into one of the tallest trees in the forest. Christian Dior had Swati Rising, and he illustrates the independent commercial venture theme with unusual historical clarity. In 1947, in the austere aftermath of the Second World War, Dior launched his first collection, the New Look, and single handedly redirected the entire course of Western fashion. He did not work within an existing structure. He created a new one on his own terms, at a moment when the world was ready for exactly what he had to offer. That capacity to read the cultural wind, bend towards what was needed, and then establish something entirely independent and original is Swati's commercial theme at its most consequential. He also brought a quality of art and aesthetic depth to commerce that connects to Swati's Saraswati dimension, fashion as a form of learning and cultural expression, not merely buying and selling. The last example of Swati rising is that of George Eliot, and she is the most complete expression of this nakshatra's learning and spiritual depth theme in the ascendant list. Born Mary Ann Evans, she published under a male pseudonym precisely because she understood that the literary world she was entering would not receive a woman's philosophical fiction on its own terms. That was a specific act of Swati adaptability, bending to a cultural wind in order to survive long enough to be heard. And what she produced from behind that veil was some of the most philosophically rich and psychologically penetrating fiction in the English language. Middlemarch, in particular, is a sustained meditation on the question of how individuals navigate between their inner vision and the social structures that constrain them, which is essentially the Swati question rendered as literature. She also needed time to develop. Her major works came later in life, after decades of translation, journalism, and intellectual formation. Swati's philosophical depth that digests slowly and expresses fully only after a long reflection. The moon in Swati shapes the inner emotional nature, the instincts, the inner drives, and the way the person processes and responds to the world from within. Bruce Lee is our first example with the moon in Swati, and he may be the single most precise illustration of this nakshatra's core philosophy in the 20th century. He developed Jeet Kune Do, his own martial arts system, around the principle that fixed styles and rigid forms were limitations to be overcome. The highest form of fighting, in his view, was complete adaptability, the ability to respond to whatever the opponent presented without being constrained by a predetermined system. He famously expressed this through the image of water, which takes the shape of whatever container it is placed in while remaining fundamentally itself. That is Swati's young shoot in philosophical form. Adapt completely to the environment, but remain entirely yourself, and use that combination to achieve what a rigid approach never could. Lee also built complete independence in both martial arts and cinema. He was an outsider in Hollywood, a Chinese American actor in an industry that had no established place for him, and he adapted around every obstacle until he could create his own films on his own terms. His independence was earned through flexibility, exactly as Swati prescribes, and his philosophical writings on martial arts as a way of life connect directly to Swati's Saraswati dimension. He was genuinely a student of profound subjects, and his thinking about adaptability, ego, and self expression has influenced people far beyond the martial arts world. Next, we look at Amitabh Bachchan with his Mohan and Swati, and his story is the most dramatic example of bending without breaking in Indian cinema history. In the late 1980s and 1990s, after a period of extraordinary dominance, his career collapsed almost completely. A failed political venture, a serious injury, and significant financial difficulties, and a string of box office failures left him in a position that most observers believed was terminal. The shoot had been bent almost to the ground. And then he adapted. Kaun Banega Crorepati, the Indian version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, launched in 2000, and Bachchan reinvented himself as a television host, reconnecting with a new generation of audience in a completely new format. From that reinvention, he rebuilt his film career, becoming more prolific, in many ways more acclaimed in his second act than his first. That arc, from the height of Bollywood dominance through total collapse to reinvention and a second career that eclipsed the first, is one of the most vivid illustrations of Swati's central quality that exists in the public record. He bent with the wind, and when the wind changed, he was still standing. Lastly, we look at Björk with a moon in Swati, and she represents the Saraswati and artistic independence theme in its most uncompromising modern form. She has spent her entire career working at the absolute frontier of what music can be, combining electronic experimentation, orchestral arrangement, vocal technique, and visual art into something that resists characterization entirely. She does not adapt to the music industry. She's built a completely independent artistic world on her own terms, and the industry has had to come to her. That is Swati's independent spirit expressed through the arts. The philosophical and meditative orientation that the text describes, combined with a creative depth that develops slowly and cannot be hurried. Her work rewards the kind of patient, reflective engagement that Swati's association with digesting understanding over time suggests. She is genuinely a student of profound subjects. Her engagement with technology, nature, feminism, and the philosophy of sound is serious and sustained. The careers associated with Swati follow directly from its themes. Those with an independent spirit and mental strength, merchants and others skilled at buying and selling, those to establish independent businesses and professional practices like entrepreneurs, freelancers, and self employed professionals of all kinds. It also includes ascetics and those who engage in strong devotional practices and students of profound subjects. The common theme is autonomy. Swati governs those who work for themselves, who set their own terms, and who have developed the flexibility and social intelligence to make that independence sustainable. It is not the nakshatra of the institutional climber or the loyal company man. It is the nakshatra of the person who eventually has to go their own way and who has the ability to make that work. To summarize what we have covered today, Swati is the 15th nakshatra, occupying the middle degrees of Libra. Its symbol is a young plant shoot quivering in the wind. Its deity is Vayu, the wind god. It has a special connection to Saraswati, the goddess of learning and the arts. Its three core themes are strategic adaptability in service of independence, independent ventures and commerce, and learning, the arts, and spiritual depth. The central insight of Swati, and the one worth carrying away from this talk, is that flexibility and independence are not opposites. The shoot bends so it can grow. The adaptability is not surrender, it is strategy. And the independence that Swati produces is not inherited or conferred. It is earned carefully through the intelligent navigation of every wind that blows. Shah Rukh Khan built an empire from nothing by reading every wind Bollywood threw at him. Christian Dior bent towards the cultural movement of 1947 and created an entirely new world of fashion. George Eliot adapted her identity to be heard and produced some of the most philosophical rich fiction in English literature. Bruce Lee turned adaptability into a philosophy. Amitabh Bachchan bent almost to the ground and straightened again into a second career that redefined what was possible. And finally, Bjork built a world so entirely her own that the industry had no choice but to come to it. That is Swati, the nakshatra that goes with the wind and arrives exactly where it intended to go.